What is an earnout? This is one of the biggest misunderstandings that owners have when they start thinking about selling their business. They hear the word earnout and they either switch off completely or they panic. But an earnout is actually one of the most useful tools in a business sale. And if you understand how it works before the buyer puts one on the table, you're in a much more stronger position to respond to it. I spoke to a business owner recently who had been through the sale process and been offered an earnout as part of the deal. His first reaction was to say no. He didn't want to sell the business and then spend the next 2 years worrying about whether he was going to get paid or not. But when I sat him down and looked through it properly, the picture was a different story. The buyer was offering him more than his original asking price, not less. The earnout wasn't a way for paying him less, it was a way for paying him more, provided that the business continued to perform as predicted. He always believed the business was worth more than the buyer was willing to pay up front. The earnout was essentially the buyer's way of saying, prove it, and we'll pay you for it. He signed the business and the business performed. He ended up with significantly more than he'd originally asked for. That's not always the outcome, but it illustrates why it's worth understanding what an earnout actually is before you decide and how you feel about it. So what is an earnout? In plain English, an earnout is a payment structure where part of the sale price is tied to the performance of the business after it changes hands. Instead of agreeing a fixed price and paying all on day one, the buyer pays the initial amount on completion and then makes up the additional payments over 1 or 2 following years, based on the business actual performance during that period. If the business hits the targets, the seller receives the full amount, and if it does better than expected, they receive more. If it underperforms, they can receive less. Why do buyers offer earnouts? Usually because there's a gap between what the buyer is willing to pay now and what the seller believes the business is worth. A buyer might look at the numbers and say, we think the business today is worth £1 million. I might say, we think it's worth 1.5 million because of what we're about to do next year. An earnout bridges that gap. The buyer pays 1 million now. If the seller is right about next year's targets, they get the extra £500,000. If they're not, they don't. It's actually a logical solution to a common problem. What are the seller's main concerns? The most common concerns I hear from sellers is this: what if the buyer runs the business badly after I leave and he blames the underperformance on me? It's a fair concern, and it's exactly why the legal drafting on an earnout matters so much. A well-drafted earnout agreement will specify exactly how performance is measured, whether it's based on EBITDA or revenue over a defined period. It will set out what the buyer can and can't do during the earnout period that might affect performance. And it will include protections for the seller if the buyer makes changes that damage the business. It should also include a cap, a maximum amount the seller can receive, so both sides know what the ceiling is, what trigger the clauses that specify what happens if the performance falls below a certain level. Get the drafting right and the earnouts can be generally a fair structure on both sides. Get it wrong and it becomes a source of conflict. When does an earnout make sense? Earnouts tend to work best in a few situations. When the seller has a strong forecast and generally believes that the business is about to have the best years. If you truly believe in the numbers, an earnout lets you get paid for that you believe. When there's a valuation gap that can't be closed any other way. Sometimes an earnout is the only structure that can get the deal done. And when the seller is willing to stay involved, or at least part of the earnout period, to help to drive the performance and structure it depends on. When should you be cautious? When you want a clean break and you don't want to be financially tied to the business after you leave. An earnout may not suit you. If you don't trust the buyer to run the business well, an earnout will be a source of anxiety for the entire period. And if the earnout targets are based on predictions you aren't confident in, think carefully about before signing up to such a thing. An earnout is not automatically good or bad. It depends entirely on the circumstances, the targets and the protections in place. If you're considering selling in the next few years, understanding what an earnout is before the buyer mentions it puts you in a much stronger position. You won't be caught off guard, you'll know the clear questions to ask, and you make a clear-headed decision on whether it works for you, rather than react into the term you've never heard of before. If you would like to talk through your own situation privately, get in touch, the link is down below.